Today, I would like to use this presentation to speak to you about the impact that the Stonewall riots had on the LGBT community as a whole. The Stonewall riots impacted the way the world views the LGBT community in many different ways. To show you how much of an impact the riots had, I will be discussing the way the people of the LGBT community were treated before the Stonewall riots took place, what happened at the Stonewall riots to actually make a difference and change this, and the way the people of the LGBT community were treated after the Stonewall riots had actually took place. First, I would like to discuss the way people of the LGBT community were treated before the Stonewall riots. The reason that I would like to discuss this is because life for people who were in the LGBT community before the riots took place was not an easy was not easy. It was not an easy world to live in if you were attracted to somebody of the same sex during this time. It was against the law and you just couldn't express yourself freely, and people just couldn't be who they were. And not because other people didn't accept it. Well, I mean, most people didn't accept it, but it was mainly because of fear of going to jail. But people of the LGBT community just felt as if they couldn't come out of the closet or let it be known to the public who they were sexually attracted to for many reasons. Some of these reasons include that they feared that they would be seen in public with their same-sex partners by police officers and get beaten with their batons. They also feared getting arrested since it was actually against the law to engage in sodomy. They feared of losing their jobs or getting evicted from where they live just because it was possible that their names could make headlines in the news if they were actually caught, and then their landlords or their bosses would see it and either fire them or evict them from their homes. And lastly, they feared of being considered mentally ill just because of who they were attracted to. In order to cope with all of these fears and still be who they knew they were at heart, the people of the LGBT community engaged in a series of different things. They would not show affection for their partners in public, and they created specific places where they would go just to feel accepted for who they were. Some of these places included bars and just hidden places around the city that they could go and be with people who were like them and just feel accepted. Ultimately, the people of the LGBT community most likely lived two completely separate lives. In the mornings, they would get up and they would go to work just like a normal person, and just like a normal person that was not involved sexually with the same sex partner. And at nighttime, they would go to these places where they could feel accepted and be who they were, so that way they didn't go crazy. In some rare cases, though, there were people who did not engage in any same-sex interactions, despite how they felt, just because of the fears that I had mentioned previously. Here in this image, you can see how gays were treated by police if they were actually caught in the act of sodomy. Secondly, I would like to talk to you about what took place at the Stonewall riots that changed the way of life for the LGBT community completely. The Stonewall riots began on June 28, 1969, when police officers raided a famous gay bar called Stonewall Inn, located in Greenwich Village, New York City. These police officers had intentions of shutting down the bar completely. This police raid was different this time than it ever has been before, and that is because the LGBT community took a stand and decided to fight back against the police officers. The retaliation got so bad that the officers actually ended up barricading themselves inside of the Stonewall Inn. Eventually, obviously, more officers were sent to help the officers that were barricaded inside the Stonewall Inn. But the LGBT community knew the streets so well in that area from having to sneak around so much that they actually outsmarted the police and ran just to attack them from behind. They just knew the roads so well that instead of standing there and fighting them, they decided to blindside them and basically run in circles around the blocks and attack the officers from behind. This fight continued on until about 4 a.m. The very next night, the bar actually reopened, and despite all the damages that were done to it the night before, but the police officers actually came back, and this time they came back with a vengeance. They were extracting tear gas on people and just began beating them with their batons all over again. However, this did not stop the members of the LGBT community by any means, though. Instead, it actually made more and more members show up to fight the police at the riots for many days to come. Eventually, things actually got so bad that the officers stopped being so harsh against these people, and the riots that were happening just kind of faded out in a way. I mean, they were still going on and everything was still being watched, but it was not as violent as it was before. But the riots had actually already made headlines in the newspapers, and this caused people from all over the world to actually see what was happening and to decide to take action against it because they were retaliating against the police officers. This image shows you the Stonewall Inn where the riots actually took place over the course of 6 days. These 3 images show you what was happening during the riots and how the members of the LGBT community were fighting against the police officers and throwing things at them. Lastly, I would like to discuss how the Stonewall riots actually impacted the LGBT community. People from all over, as I discussed before, came together to fight for their rights because of what actually happened at the Stonewall riots. This eventually caused an uprising that launched a new era of resistance and revolution for gay rights. The gay rights movement took off, and even though we can't say this was due to the Stonewall riots, it definitely ended up playing a major role in causing the gay rights movement to take place. Exactly a year after the riots took place, the first ever gay pride parade set off from Stonewall Inn, and these parades still take place today. States also began to ease up on the restrictions and laws towards people of the LGBT community. Eventually, some states even began allowing same-sex marriage, and as of today, 46 out of the 50 states still do. Lastly, in 2019, the New York Police Department finally even apologized on their behalf for the actions that actually took place on the day of the Stonewall riots. People of the LGBT community begged forever for the people of the police department to make a statement and apologize for the way that they acted. So it was actually very impactful for the LGBT community whenever they did come out and apologize. All of these events show you the positive impact the Stonewall riots had on the LGBT community, and how the Stonewall riots started an uprising for the LGBT community. These 3 images show you multiple different pride parades that have taken place since the Stonewall riots. Overall, I just hope that through this presentation, you have a better understanding of how the LGBT community was treated before the Stonewall riots, what happened at the Stonewall riots to make a difference for the LGBT community, and how the LGBT community was positively impacted through the Stonewall riots. Progress has been made towards better rights for the LGBT community, and that is what I tried to show you through my presentation. However, that does not mean that the LGBT community is where they need to be when it comes to their rights. They still have a long way to go to be seen as equals in the world, but with time and based on how much progress they have made, I have high hopes that they will be seen as equals in all aspects of the world and by everyone someday.